Hey guys, welcome to another mixing video here on the channel. As you wish, today is part 2 of compression. So if you haven't seen the first one, there's a link up here. You can check out the first video where I will explain like all the basics you need for compression, what is attack, what is threshold, how does ratio work, all the little things you need to know. Today is a little more advanced, so if you haven't seen the first one, definitely do this. And now let's jump into the more advanced version of how to learn compression. So the first thing we want to talk about is limiters, because limiters somehow are like compressors, but somehow also different. So let's make a little recap. How do compressors work? So we have a threshold at which everything which is above the threshold, like in dB, like we have a threshold of minus 10 dB. So everything above minus 10 dB will be lowered in volume depending on the ratio and also the attack, right? So the difference, if you compare it to a limiter now, is that there is no ratio. The ratio of a limiter is always infinite. What that means is normally you would have a ratio like 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 8. Now it's 1 to infinite, which means everything that crosses the threshold will be completely cut. There is no way that anything can be louder than the threshold. Okay, so that means everything above the threshold is just, it's not gone. It will be completely squashed down to the threshold. So we will have a lot of gain reduction there, and everything will feel much louder if we put a limiter on. So usually we have limiters on the master, right? For example, here I have a limiter. If I let the beat roll, for example, you can see here that with every hit of the clap, kick and clap together trigger the limiter here, and it gets limited. If we have a look at the smexoscope now, you can see we kind of make the sound a little louder. That's because a limiter doesn't work by threshold usually. There's also threshold limiters, but rather the threshold is fixed. So here the ceiling, which is the threshold now, is minus 0.3 dB. So minus 0.3 dB is the threshold, and we have a gain, an input gain, that enables us to lift the sound closer to the threshold. So instead of having a threshold and putting it to the level of our sound, instead now we put our sound to the level of the threshold, which is 0 or 0.3 in this case. So if we don't push like 2.6 dB, but rather go with minus 3 dB as a ceiling, the same thing happens. But now everything is not completely at the 0 dB, but rather at the minus 3. So that's basically how it works. Let's go back to what we had before and have a look at the kick drum, because since limiting is mainly used in mastering to have everything on an equal level, right? And also to push the loudness of the whole track. In EDM, and especially modern EDM, we also use limiters on our individual tracks sometimes to already make them super compressed and very, very strong. We have to be careful though, because we will also cut all our transients, right? Imagine a kick has a little transient that is louder than like its body, for example. It will be completely cut. So this is what we actually have here. So if we have a look at our kick drum, let's solo this. We can see that we have the transient being louder than everything. So now here I have two limiters, the Ableton limiter, and I also have the FabFilter Pro L2, which is a very, very good limiter, and we want to compare just a little bit how they work, right? So first of all, let's have a look at the Ableton limiter. I add some gain now. And you already see what's happening. Instead of having like the nice shape, like the transient and then the sub goes down a little bit, everything is one line. So that's what I mean by there's no way above the threshold of a limiter, which this time is exactly 0 dB, right? So we lose the transient, but therefore we get a lot of loudness. So let's compare this maybe with the FEB filter now, just to have an impression on how this one works. Here we also have a very nice optical representation of what's happening. And the same way here, for example, we can put down the ceiling. We can also do something similar here, right? If I put this up and hold the option, then the output will go down, which will essentially result in the same thing. Because we go 17.5 dB in and 17.5 dB out now, we don't really raise the volume, but rather just change the loudness of the sound. So we have to be really careful if we do this on our tracks. And so since this is an advanced tutorial, I'm showing you this, but you have to be really careful. What you don't want to do is put limiters on everything and think that solves the problem of having too spiky transients or not being too compressed and loud. It will sound unnatural and you will lose all the power of your track because the transients are gone. But for example, a kick drum, let's have a look at this again. Let's put the ceiling to -6 dB now. And give a little more of gain. So what happened now? If we compare limiter off and on now, right, those are the two. This is the not limited version, this is the limited version. You can see this is also how tracks in Rekordbox mostly look like. The kick is very much limited. But you also have to have in mind that there will always be a limiter on the master. So don't put too much limiting on the individual tracks, but to reach the actual super loudness that the tracks have at the moment, or not of any type of genre, but especially techno is super loud, and also like some kind of melodic techno and everything. Actually, a lot of electronic genres work like this at the moment. You would have some limiting, for example, on the kick or on the drum bass already. But I want to repeat this again. Keep in mind, limiting is not only a good thing, it also has its downside. So you have to be really careful if you apply limiting to a kick. So we want to find good settings now. This I like very much. Like here we have the not limited version, and here we have the limited version. There is still some transient, but we can see that the overall shape of the sub bass is now a little more compressed, and this is what we want to have when we limit, like for example, our kick drum. So now, since some of you also have asked this question on the last video, I want to talk about the release of a compressor a little bit more, or also of a limiter in this case. So what release means is when the threshold is not crossed anymore, how long does it take the compressor to like take away the gain reduction and come back to the original gain. So if we have a very short release, right after the threshold is not crossed anymore, bam, we go back up to the original volume. While if we have a very long release, it will take, for example, 200 milliseconds for the compressor to go back. If in that time, while it's not even back, there will be a new transient or like sound that crosses the threshold, it goes back down already before it has even reached the original volume again, which is why release is very important. And also we can draw a very, very important conclusion from that. The longer the release, the less loudness we will get, because what loudness means essentially is that the difference between the highest and the lowest points of volume, right, are closer. So if we limit the transient, but then it takes a lot of time for the sound to actually reach its volume, then it will not feel as loud as if we have a short release and right after the transient gets cut, we go back up to the volume. So let's have a listen in practice. Let's put the release to like 400, 300, very, very long, and have a listen to the speed. Okay, get used to the sound. Right now I will play it again, and at some point I will put the release down to almost nothing. Could you hear the difference? I'm gonna do it again, and we're gonna train this now. And I want you to focus especially on the offbeat hi-hat, right? You know, Typical 909, I'm going to play the sound in solo just for you to know what I'm talking about. This is what we're talking about now. Focus on that and how it changes if I put the release from a lot to almost nothing. Did you hear it now? Well, it's subtle, definitely. It's definitely, I mean, not like the most obvious change that's happening. And this is because this is compression part 2. We're already like talking about more advanced stuff. So definitely take your time, try to figure this out, and you will learn it, definitely. It takes a little bit of time to make your ear used to what compression does. I said this before in the last video. So Smexoscope, for example, is a good way to train this, because if we look at Smexoscope now, I have the release up again. You can see that there is much more loudness, right? And yes, so the release is very important here. And then auto release. A big question was auto release. Well, auto release kind of works like it's somehow trying to find the best release for your sound by itself. So it can be helpful in the beginning, but also I wouldn't recommend to always just say like, I put it on auto and it's fine because it will just do it the way I want to. Maybe it doesn't get the way you want to compress or limit the sound. Maybe it understands it in a wrong way. So it's always better to have your own listen and try to learn to hear the difference between a long release and a short release. That also works super good on drum loops. In the last video, for example, about compression, you can download a lot of drum loops that are made for you for free, and then you can put your compressors on there and try to hear the different settings that you can try. I'm explaining all of this in the last video. So this is perfect for also learning how to hear the release. So I definitely recommend you to do this, and I can promise you in no time you will already notice that you will get better at this. So now to the next topic that is a little difficult to understand, and also I would say it's not the most practical thing. Like you wouldn't need that too often, or like it wouldn't really change like everything if you understand and also know how to use this. But obviously it's helpful, like don't get me wrong, I'm just saying there's more important things to learn about compression than what we're talking about now. But as I said before, this is a little more advanced, this video. So let's talk about knee. There's hard knee and soft knee, and sometimes that's even not just a switch. Like for example here, you can go from 0 to 18 dB. And the question is now, what does that mean, right? So here I have a vocal. The rhythm is grooving, let me take you on the floor. And we're gonna apply a little compression here. We don't have too much attack because we want to catch some of the transients, right? The release is also not too long because we don't want to lose too much loudness. And in general, the compression is overall not that strong. So what happens now if I move the knee up and down? Let's maybe just have a listen first and try to figure that out. The rhythm is grooving, let me take you on the floor. My rhythm is grooving, DJ wants some more. Please also have a look at the gain reduction down here. Like what happens if I move the knee from 18 dB, which would be a soft knee, to 0 dB, which would be a hard knee. The rhythm is grooving, let me take you on the floor. My rhythm is grooving, DJ wants some more. The rhythm is grooving, let me take you on the floor. My rhythm is... So what you'll notice is that if I have this knee at 18 dB, then the gain reduction is stronger, right? There's stronger gain reduction, but also the values change a lot. While if I put it to 0 dB, there's almost no gain reduction applied, just 1 dB, like 0.9, and it really stays at this value. So you can also see this graphic here in the Ableton compressor, and that's actually a very nice one because it exactly shows what's happening if you apply knee. So if you apply hard knee, if you have like 0 dB at knee, or put your compressor on hard knee. I said knee 10 times now. Anyways, if you have hard knee, that means the moment you cross the threshold, everything on, like all the compression is applied. Everything, like from 0 to 100 in no time. The difference now, if I put this up, if I go to a soft knee instead, is that there will be an area created around the threshold. And in this area, like you can see, it's those lines here, right? Those lines. If we have 0, there is no area at all. If we move this up, we get a little area, and there's also a little shift in this curve. What this means now, 9 dB, is that we have a 9 dB spectrum where, for example, if we have the threshold like here at -9, and then we have like a softer knee. For example, if we are at -12, there will already be some compression, even though the threshold is not crossed, but it will not be as strong as when it actually crosses the threshold. So that's the theory, right? Let me specify that again. Like knee builds an area around the threshold where compression is already applied. If it's below the threshold, it's softer, and then above the threshold, it's a little stronger, while at the threshold, it's also not at the actual 100% that we will have. So what that means is for a vocal now, if we have a hard knee, there will be peaks and they will either get completely compressed or not at all. While if we have a soft knee, there will be a much smoother compression going on, and you will also not be able to hear the compression that strong. So using hard knee and soft knee, it really depends on the sound and what you want to do with compression. So for example, if I have a vocal like this and I want to do a vocal ride, which means I want to level the vocal better, like there would be some, we can have a look, it's actually already kind of well compressed, I would say, but still we could say this is a little louder, this is a little louder here. So if we apply soft knee compression, then we can generally put everything a little smoother together, and the compressor will not be as audible to the listener as if we put a hard knee compression on there, which will be more audible and more like direct compression. So for example, for drums and something that has very fast transient, that would be better, definitely, to have a hard knee. But for having vocals or maybe also synthesizers that are not too transient but are rather changing the volume a little bit, like for example, if you open the cutoff and it just becomes louder just because, you know, there's more frequencies added, right? Then with a softer knee, you can kind of dial this back in a little bit very smoothly without changing too much of the character of your sound. I hope that was helpful to you guys. Some more mixing content will be available very soon. And in the meantime, let us know in the comments, what are you interested the most? Is it how you can EQ stuff, how you use compression on other sounds, how to, I don't know, put reverb and delay as a mixing tool in your tracks? So let us know in the comments and we will feature it. Until then, have a good time and keep making music.